He has received a formal apology from the Crown, along with a compensation offer of just over $2.5 million for being wrongfully imprisoned for rape and murder. Mr. Pora spent almost 22 years in jail before his convictions for the 1992 attack on Susan Burdett in Auckland were quashed by the Privy Council. Justice Minister Amy Adams announced details of the package this afternoon, saying she hoped it would go some way towards compensating him for the devastating impact of spending 2 decades in prison for crimes he simply hadn't committed. This was announced at a media conference just under 2 hours ago, and we pick it up with the Minister, Amy Adams, reading the letter she sent to Mr. Pora, which he received yesterday.
Dear Mr. Pora, I am writing to you on behalf of the Crown to formally apologise to you for your wrongful conviction and imprisonment for murder, sexual violation by rape and aggravated burglary. The Crown accepts that you are innocent of the offences for which you were convicted in 1994 and again in 2000. I acknowledge that over the past 2 decades you have suffered considerably, including the many years you spent away from your young daughter as a result of your convictions and imprisonment. To compensate you, the Crown has agreed to make an ex gratia payment to you of $2,520,949.42. While it can never completely remedy the injustice you have suffered, I hope that the Crown's offer of compensation can go some way in helping you and your family build a better future together. I believe that by and large, New Zealanders enjoy a fair and effective criminal justice system. However, mistakes are possible in any system that relies on human judgment. On behalf of the Crown and the criminal justice system, I apologise unreservedly for the devastating impact the wrongful conviction and imprisonment has had on your life. As I said earlier, I believe that on the whole, New Zealanders enjoy a fair and effective criminal justice system. The New Zealand justice system has a highly regarded, robust appeal process for dealing with people who consider they've been wrongly convicted. Around 85,000 people every year are convicted. 99.9% of convictions are upheld. The few that are overturned demonstrate the system works as it should, with the review of decisions of lower courts being under the jurisdiction of higher courts in the appellate system. But no system is perfect, and I accept that mistakes are possible and are made. It's now clear that the system has erred in this case, and the decisions announced today recognise this. So turning to the issue of compensation. Applying the Cabinet guidelines, Mr Hanson recommended that Mr Pora receive a sum, as I said, of $2,520,949.42 as compensation for his wrongful conviction and imprisonment. Cabinet has accepted that recommendation and has agreed to compensate Mr Pora in the amount that Mr Hanson recommended. I understand that it is proposed that the bulk of the compensation will be paid to a trust that has been established for the benefit of Mr Pora and his family. It's to be expected that there will be a range of views as to the appropriateness of the quantum of the payment, but cabinets across successive governments have recognised the importance of having a publicly accessible set of guidelines that are consistently applied across all cases. Those guidelines include provision for an independent assessment and advice on exactly how they should be applied in each case. That is the process that has been used for the previous 8 people to receive compensation since the guidelines on quantum were adopted, and it is the process that has been applied here to derive the amount to be paid. Today I have publicly released both of Mr Hanson's reports so that the basis of his findings can be understood. So in conclusion, as I've said to Mr Pora, while we can never completely remedy the injustice that he has suffered, I do hope that these findings, along with the compensation offered, go some way towards helping him and his family build a better future together.
Justice Minister Amy Adams. Now, the compensation package was decided after Cabinet considered reports from High Court Judge Rodney Hanson, QC. Mr Hanson did suggest Cabinet consider making an adjustment for inflation. This is the figure of $100,000 for every year in jail. We're going to talk about that a bit in a moment, but that was decided against. Ms Adams said guidelines didn't provide for inflation adjustments, and Mr Pora's offer was in line with past offers to others who had been wrongly imprisoned.
Every other applicant who has been compensated under the guidelines has not been inflation adjusted. This has been the way it has been approached since the guidelines were in place, and we have to ensure some sort of equity. And And probably the most important reason is that the decision that Cabinet made was whether we were still comfortable that the $100,000 per year of incarceration was an appropriate figure. And in making that decision, we were guided by a range of other international jurisdictions and the thresholds they have in place. And the New Zealand figure of $100,000 a year still, I think, sits very well alongside those. For example, in the UK, if you've been in prison for more than 10 years, your total compensation is capped at no more than £1 million. Across a number of states in the US, the compensation per year ranges from a figure around $18,000 up to a maximum of $100,000. So there are a range of approaches, but we were comfortable that our figure remains appropriate.
Amy Adams, we'll have more on that compensation figure in a moment. Teina Pora's legal team included lawyers Jonathan Krebs and Ingrid Squire, along with Tim McKinnell, of course, the private investigator, and initially policemen who first had doubts about Pora's guilt and began to look at the case. Everything began to change when Tim McKinnell became involved. Now, in response to Amy Adams, Ingrid Squire told media a short time ago that Mr Pora was grateful for the Crown's apology and to have his innocence formally acknowledged. She says he received the offer only yesterday.
He's aware of the offer of compensation, and it is just that. It is an offer of compensation for Teina to accept or not. Now, the reality is there's very little that can be done if the amount isn't accepted, but I'm sure you'll appreciate that for anyone in this situation, it's a significant moment and something that can't be rushed into. Particularly for Teina, in his circumstances, which have been well documented, he needs time to reflect on the offer. And that's what we're asking for now. He's going to take time to think about it. He's going to take further advice from us. And in due course, he'll be in a position to accept, or otherwise, the offer of compensation. As you'll be aware, the offer is approximately $2.5 million. Of that, approximately $2.2 million is for Teina's non-pecuniary losses. That's his loss of liberty for the 22 years of his wrongful imprisonment, the loss of his relationship with his family, the ability to marry, to spend his 20s like the rest of us have been fortunate enough to do, and indeed his 30s. The remaining approximate $300,000 is for Teina's pecuniary losses. That is his actual fiscal loss, which includes a component of loss of income for his 22 years of wrongful imprisonment, a contribution with respect to a loss of future earnings, as well as all of the costs incurred by him in the application for compensation.
That's Ingrid Squire. The other lawyer who devoted so much of his time and energy to representing Teina Pora was Jonathan Krebs. He addressed the issue of compensation too, which both lawyers regard as less than is fairly due. Now, the $2.5 million amount Teina Pora is being offered, as Ingrid Squire is discussing, is mostly set on a figure of $100,000 for each year in prison. There are other factors, as we discussed, but it's that $100,000 per annum equation that's most important. So obviously multiply $100,000 by 21 years and you get the bulk of the offer. This was the same formula that was used for Arthur Allen Thomas, 9 years in prison, $900,000 in compensation in his case. But that was in 1979, and $100,000 obviously had considerably more value then, more spending power. This was an issue our reporter Edward Gay raised with lawyer Jonathan Krebs.
And just on the Thomas case, I mean, he spent 9 years in prison, and when you sort of put that into today's money, it's a bit over $4 million.
But that's only
that's the cold hard number.
that's only the number of years. When you multiply that out for Teina to 22 years, you end up with a figure which would be over $10 million. So that was more than we had claimed, certainly more than we could have reasonably expected.
Was there what was the figure that you had looked at? What would be a figure that you wouldn't be disappointed with?
Well, it's really hard to say. And as Edward's just said, you know, how do you put a figure on these things? I think we had to say, well, we don't know. We looked at other cases, we did some arithmetic, we did some comparisons, and we had a range. We naturally sought the most we thought we could reasonably seek, and you will see from the papers that the amount that we had suggested could be appropriate, and the upper limit was about the $8 million mark. So we were well off the mark in that sense.
Jonathan Krebs, so The Crown has offered $2.5 million. Teina Pora's legal team believes somewhere approaching $8 million was more appropriate. A big difference. Teina Pora himself has to consider the offer now and respond. As for the police, well, we invited them onto Checkpoint tonight to discuss Mr Pora's wrongful imprisonment. They declined. In a statement a short time ago, Acting Commissioner Glenn Dumbier said there are lessons to be learnt from this case, but there is nothing to suggest that police staff involved acted in anything other than good faith.